Hi, everybody. It's Erica from In the Company of Cards, back again with another Sunday conversation. And thrilled to have you all here. Welcome to all my returning subscribers. Welcome to my new viewers. Please do like, share, subscribe. It's what helps the channel grow. So today I have one of my favorite astrologers. You all know I know nothing about astrology. I always tell my astrologer friends, you're speaking to the lowest common denominator here. But I do, even though I don't really know much about it, I love hearing about it, and I know you all do too. So I have one of my favorite ones here. This is Anthony Perrotta from Rhode Island, and he is an astrologer, a designer, a storyteller, a poet, and a stylist. You can see he's a stylist because, he's stylish. And I asked him to talk about astrology however he wants to, but specifically, this is not a primer on, what's your sign, but it's sort of, I asked if he would talk to us about where we are, what transits we need to be paying attention to, how we can maybe look at some of these transits in new ways. So welcome, Anthony. I'm thrilled to have you on my channel. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here.
Erica, thank you so much for having me. You know that I adore you and, I adore your partnership as well. And I'm super excited to have this chat and kind of talk about some of the transits and the astrology and the cycles that we happen to find ourselves caught up in right now, which is a lot.
Yeah, which is a lot, exactly.
Yes.
And I mentioned before we started the recording, I said the one thing I know is the thing everybody talks about, Pluto in Aquarius. That's what I know.
Yeah.
And so every time I see some big thing happen, something that looks really bad and destructive, I say, what I always say is physics tells us that two things can't take up the same space at the same time.
Mhm.
So if there's going to be something new, that means something old has to go by the boards.
Mhm.
And that essentially, right, is Pluto and Aquarius.
Definitely can be. It's interesting. I do find that Pluto in Aquarius is becoming a bit of a scapegoat for larger things that are happening um, in the world globally, but also, we both live in the US currently. So also what's kind of going on in the United States political climate. And I don't disagree that Pluto in Aquarius is having a moment and is definitely doing its thing, but I don't think it's the only thing.
School us, school me.
Yeah, I don't think it's the only thing that is completely shifting, I'm going to say our worldview or our political climate in any way, shape, or form. I think it's really helpful. Actually, I want to say this to start. Today is the new moon in Taurus, right? Sunday is the new moon in Taurus. So it feels really, really good to kind of have this conversation at the start of a new lunar cycle. And particularly for me, Taurus tends to have a relationship with like values, tends to have a relationship with worthiness and sort of the foundations of things. So to kind of have this conversation, maybe helping other people build a different sense of values based on what's happening astrologically and politically. So I just want to throw that out there that I think this is
That's so
perfect
cool
timing.
because here I know nothing, and yet Spirit must have said to me, let today be the day because it's
Yeah.
a new moon in Taurus. Look at that. I love it.
It's beautiful. So yes, let's talk a little bit about Pluto and Aquarius maybe to start. So Pluto is a generational planet. There are what I call three generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Pluto takes the longest to go through a sign. It can be 14 to 20 years, depending on the sign or the time it takes to go through each zodiac sign individually. So Pluto has the most long-term influence, but also I would say some of the most subtle influences. It doesn't feel so subtle right now, and there are reasons for that.
Mm.
But partly this is because Pluto rules the underworld and the underbelly. So it's kind of creating change below the surface. It's creating change at the root. And if we think about where we are in our climate in the United States in particular, the US was founded under Pluto in Capricorn. So it has just finished its Pluto return. For something to have a Pluto return, it takes 250 years, 248 years, right? So
That's a
here we
lot.
are. Yeah, it's a very long time. So I think part of the reason why we're starting to feel a lot of this transmutation and a lot of this transformation does start there. Okay. With Pluto being generational from personal astrology or like more, I guess, like private astrology in sense, like meaning you won't feel this necessarily as face forward as you will see happening more in the collective, which again is happening. Pluto in Aquarius has promised to bring up sort of both the shadow and the light in what Aquarius represents. So part of this is progress
Mhm.
and hope and future ideation and ideals, but then also dogmaticism, right?
Mhm.
Authoritarianism, fascism. So, and the reason why I bring this up is because sometimes with Aquarius, there's this disconnected humanitarianism that comes up. Okay. Meaning that when we want to do something that's for the benefit of others, sometimes there's a sense of being removed from that benefit or maybe having even like your own personal gain from this. Aquarius also rules.
Interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
you know why I'm going, I'm looking like, oh, because my father was considered quite the altruist, the civil rights activist,
Mhm.
etc. But he was an Aquarian.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you that I knew him very well.
Uh-huh.
There was a formality and a
Mhm.
distance to him. He was
Mhm.
all about the people and the doing good, and but one to one, there was a coolness,
Yes.
I'll say, about it.
Yes. Yeah. So you have to understand, Aquarius is fixed air. Okay. So air is social consciousness. If we think about it, it's communication, it's society.
Mhm.
Fixedness, there's a stubbornness, a stagnation, and kind of a continuation. So when I think about this in terms, there's a rigidity sometimes to fixedness. So it's the ability to break rules to make your own feels very Aquarius, right? But I always say Aquarians love people, but don't necessarily like people, right? So there's this sense of like we know or they know in general what's best for all, but it doesn't mean that they need to have that very personal approach in order to make that happen. So there is a sense of removedness, almost like a King of Swords energy, right? They can hover and see that big picture and they can be really critical of what needs to be done in order to make things progress. Okay.
Mhm.
But what I was getting at also is that Aquarius rules technology and innovation. And so we're seeing both the shadow and light of that as well, where, we are starting to see a lot of research coming up that can benefit us medically and, personally. There's been talk about the eradication of HIV and AIDS, which is amazing. But then on the other side of this, we're seeing how technology is being used as a form of control, right?
Right.
And stagnation and helping to push sort of an authoritarian agenda. What's I think is really important to understand is that Pluto in Aquarius is about the power to the people, not the disenfranchisement of people. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. So what we're going to find is that in the beginning of this transit, there is going to be things that challenge the power of people to remind us that we can collectively come together and make a betterment in humanity. What that might mean, though, is that in true Aquarius fashion, we may have to be less personally involved in making sure that all of the things that we want are pushed forward for all of us to
Mhm.
to kind of move forward. It's sort of this idea that progress happens in stages, and that's not fair to say, right, necessarily, because that means that sometimes some people get left out. But
Mhm.
it also means that we all have to put certain differences aside
Mhm.
to kind of rage against the larger machine,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's kind of where this altruism comes in. It's like, well, what's the common denominator? One of the things that I think will show up a lot in the coming years is that this isn't necessarily going to be a culture war. It's going to be a class war.
Right.
Okay. And I think that that's really where Pluto and Aquarius in its positive is going to shine the most because the thing that's going to bring people together is when they realize that they are more aligned in certain class systems than not. We're seeing this already with the oligarchy,
Right.
right? Or the bro-oligarchy, as they're calling it. Again, tech, right? A lot of them are in tech, the
Yep.
dark side of Aquarius, but also the power to the people. The last time we had Pluto in Aquarius, not only was it American Revolution, it's also the French Revolution, right? It was also the Haitian Revolution. So we had several uprisings of people coming together to create grassroots movements
Mhm,
to make what they believed is a better, more equitable system moving forward. Okay.
mhm,
So this is why, in my opinion, Pluto and Aquarius is getting a lot of the scapegoat right now.
mhm,
All
mhm,
right. But it isn't the only. So there are other several astrological transits that we are about to experience that are going to actually support Pluto in Aquarius. I talked about two other generational planets already, Uranus and Neptune, very briefly. Both of those planets in 2026 are going to move full time into new signs. In 2025, this year, we are going to get a brief view or look into what that looks like or feels like. So it starts with Neptune. Neptune will move into Aries for the first time since the 1860s. Do we remember what happened historically in the US in the 1860s?
yeah, we had a civil war.
We had a civil war. Yes. And I'm not saying this to go, oh no, we're going into a civil war. Actually, I'm saying this to remind us that again, we're pushing towards this idea of progress, but it's going to take us coming together to make that progress happen. If Neptune is our collective belief system, right? It's our collective spirituality, it's
Mhm,
our collective ideals. Aries is the sign of like the fighter or the warrior in some way. So a literal translation of this to me feels like the beliefs that are worth fighting for. Okay. So we have to ask ourselves individually and collectively, what beliefs do we have that are worth fighting for?
mhm.
Now, Neptune will enter or has actually entered Aries as of the end of March this year. It will be here until about October. And then I believe it is January of 2026, it'll fully move into Aries for 14 years.
Now let me ask
So,
you a question. So
yes,
speaking of spiritual stuff from Neptune, could this explain this rise of Christo nationalism and then the response against it?
yes, 1000% it can. It's interesting. I was looking at Neptune in Aries in history, and that has sort of been part of the cycle of Neptune in Aries has been spiritual warfare or like utilizing certain religious or spiritual beliefs in order to push certain agendas. I can actually look through, see if I can find some notes for you around some of the last time we had Neptune in Aries. But
And interesting that the Pope dies right now.
yes, people are putting a lot of astrological influence. There are certain things that have happened around the Pope's passing astrologically. One of the things that people were talking about is the current Saturn Neptune not Neptune Saturn North Node conjunction.
Mhm,
I don't know if I want to put an astrological influence on the passing of the Pope. I don't think that's fair. I don't always like to astrologically explain people's death,
mhm.
right? Because we're human and we don't know when our time comes. But I do think that the cultural significance of this becomes really important because the Catholic Church has always been a perpetrator of colonialism,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And hoards a lot of the wealth and the power in the world. But then in this weird juxtaposition, the most recent pope was also the most progressive, I'm going to put that in quotes,
right,
within the Catholic Church's realm of
right.
being of a pope that has ever existed,
Right.
right?
And now the church will have a choice in terms of which
Hmm.
direction it goes, you know,
Hmm.
and
It's true.
who
It's
knows?
true. So yeah, it's interesting to witness kind of that particular portion of this. And I think that we will find that there will be some infighting within certain religious organizations. I think Christianity being a good one. I think a great example of this is the fact that like the Protestants and the Catholics, right, historically have never gotten along.
Right.
And I'm now finding the notes that I had where during a cycle of Neptune in Aries was the dissolution of the monasteries and the head of and King Henry VIII breaking from Rome to declare himself as the head
Oh, yeah,
of
that's
England, right, the Church of England.
yes. Yes.
So, that was during a period where we're seeing now that's like kind of the starting of the fight of the Protestants and Catholics. I'm going to put that in quotes. But also during that same period when Neptune was in Aries during then, we had Uranus and Gemini, which I'll touch on because we're going to start experiencing that very soon. And we also had Pluto in Aquarius.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Neptune in Aries, one of the things that it's going to also bring up for us is not just like kind of this, are certain beliefs worth fighting for, but also certain advancements in medicine and technology. Neptune rules drugs, both illicit and prescription.
Mhm.
And in history, Neptune in Aries has brought big medical advancements, including pasteurization. And I think this is really interesting. Yeah, I think this is really interesting with the raw milk movement
Yes.
surfacing. So, and just recently, I believe it was the FDA is going to start deregulating dairy. I know I have a lot of opinions on that because I think
Yeah.
pasteurization is a good thing. But, so it's going to be really interesting to see like how that shifts things. Another thing that came about during Neptune and Aries was the Red Cross was founded, right? So we're seeing like major medical organizations coming together for the benefit of humanity. And then another one that kind of came up was publishing the periodic table of elements.
Oh, so
Okay.
these are big, big things.
Yes,
So
like
maybe,
big advancements.
and this is over a period of how many years?
So this is throughout history when Neptune has been in Aries.
Right,
So
but
all the things I mentioned. Oh, it's 14-year transit.
okay. So
Yep.
so technically, for example, I'm trying to think of like a big thing, right?
Yep.
We could think of, I mean, and people hate the word, but I mean, socialization of medicine.
Yes. Could happen.
Because that would be as
It could.
revolutionary a thing here, right?
In
As
the, especially in the US. Yes,
US. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
So, that could be a direction that we go in. Of course, I believe, so I'm going to say this really clearly. Astrology happens with us, not to us.
That's
So,
the thing. Okay, I was going to ask you this. So people seem to think, right? They'll go to astrologers and they want to know, like they come to me with my cards, what's going to happen? But
yep.
isn't it more that astrology reflects what already is happening on
Yes.
not
So some people so I think it goes back to this theory of do we have free will or is it fate, right? And people will disagree with me on this and I welcome the disagreements, but I am camp free will,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
I think we are given opportunities and it's what we do with the opportunities. So
mhm.
if we know all of this revolutionary energy in a more collective sense is coming up, yes, we are feeling it. So we are all protesting. I don't know. I mean, I went to the protest on April 5th and there were 5 million people in the US all coming together. And I thought that was absolutely incredible. I think that's power to the people. It was more than the 3.75% that they wanted to show up as part of the population. But then we also have, the wait and see crowd. And I don't think that to me, astrology happens in the wait and see. Will certain things still transpire? Absolutely. But there are other forces that are active for those things to transpire. So if you want to make changes in your own life personally and collectively, you have to be an active participant in the astrology itself.
Right. So when we see these big movements happening, I mean, this is that quantum physics theory, right? That where you focus your attention is, I mean, that your mind, not the brain, but the mind is
Mhm.
is the thing that moves mountains and makes things happen. So when we have these collective mind shifts or focuses, that's when things happen, and that the astrology reflects that.
Right.
Okay.
1000%. 1000%. So, you know, kind of going back to what I was saying, yes, it could create like a socialization of medicine or in our medical systems, but it's going to take us as people wanting that and trying to push that agenda even outside of the best interests of our politicians.
Mhm.
Okay. Again, as I mentioned, Pluto in Aquarius is power to the people. And as I've mentioned, Neptune in Aries is also what beliefs do you have that are worth fighting for?
Mhm,
An interesting story, and to connect this to healthcare,
mhm.
an interesting story that emerged during Neptune and Aries in the 1300s was part of the peasant revolution or the peasant revolt and the emergence of the story of Robin Hood. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's the classic tale of this Aries character of this person who is being a vigilante, taking from the rich and giving to the poor.
Right.
Okay. And kind of taking no prisoner along the way.
Mhm,
Recently, whether you agree with what had happened or not, at the end of last year, we had Luigi Mangione, who
mhm.
went through and killed a CEO of a healthcare company. People have likened him to a Robin Hood. Yes, that is the word that is used often. And he will be used as probably as a spectacle to show, this is what happens when you revolt. But what's interesting is I think it's going to create it already has an even larger revolution. Something that we saw emerge out of that particular story that happened with Luigi is that the class system they started to come together, right? The middle, lower, anyone who wasn't in the higher tiers of
Mhm.
class started to come together and go, oh, wait, no, like, I've suffered issues with healthcare companies. I've been a victim of this thing. And so this is why he has been put up on this pedestal
Right.
as this Robin Hood figure,
And he
right?
may become a martyr to it since I know they're seeking the death penalty for him.
And that feels very Neptunian.
Yeah.
Neptune in tarot is the hanged one,
Oh,
right?
oh, okay.
So it's very much so this martyr
Yeah.
sacrifice situation. Whether again you think it's right or wrong, that story is emerging in a certain way that's going to progress us in some ways, hopefully, as a society, if again we are willing to act right on those systems or act on the opportunities. So we have Neptune and Aries, kind of what are beliefs worth fighting for, power to the people, Pluto and Aquarius, and then we have Uranus and Gemini. And
Yeah.
so Uranus enters Gemini this year briefly in July 8th. It will only be there for a couple months, and then it will enter fully for 7 years, starting April 2026.
So we get a little foretaste of what it's going to be like.
Yes. So this year is like a smorgasbord. It's like going to a cocktail party at a wedding, right?
Mhm,
You're
mhm,
going to taste all the things
mhm,
before you sit down to the big meal. All
mhm,
right.
mhm.
So the Uranus and Gemini in history, the last time we had this was about 84, 85 years ago, which then would have put us towards the middle end of World War II.
Okay.
And right. And again, all of these times have reflected certain warlike things. I'm not saying we're heading into a literal war, to
Mhm,
be clear.
mhm,
I think it's just more people reaching their threshold and limits of what we feel like we can take.
mhm, mhm.
Uranus and Gemini has often brought about advancements in technology, communication devices, forms of communication, as well as advancements in transportation.
Huh.
We saw major production around transportation during World War II, right? New fighter planes coming out, right? Shifting gears and actually a lot of women entering the workforce,
Right.
specifically in male-dominated industries
Right.
because most of them were off fighting war.
Right.
So what's interesting is Gemini is a duality, right? It's the twins. So we will see two things trying to exist at the same time during Uranus and Gemini. And I think for us, it's about trying to find the bridges or the conversations that are happening. So Uranus and Gemini, Uranus is the planet of revolution. It's the planet of freedom and change. In tarot, it is the Fool.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
So, and Gemini is the lovers. We are leaping into a greater sense of unity or balance if we're willing to revolutionize our perspective, because that's what Gemini is asking for. Gemini is also mutable in nature, meaning that it is flexible and fluid in nature. So, Uranus and Gemini is going to ask us to be very flexible in our thought processes. And like we need to be able to pivot quickly. So fight for our beliefs, power to the people, but then also revolutionize our perspective. If we do these three things, we are going to work well with some of the larger generational astrology that is happening right now. So Uranus will be in Gemini for 7 years. Go
So,
ahead.
and with this Uranus and Gemini, I mean, not that I want to sully our conversation with people, sir, but it makes me
Yeah.
think of Musk and
Hmm.
how he's touted his transportation thing as his whatever Tesla, and people jumped on it, but now people are jumping off of it. In other words,
Yep.
that's not going to be the thing, right?
No.
Gives us a little bit of a glimpse of what's possible, but it is not
Yep.
the thing,
I think you bringing this up is fantastic because again, it's revolutionizing our perspective.
right?
Our perspective was the future of transportation and automotives was electric, solar, right, clean. I still think it is. I think that is very much so the future. But I think we cannot align ourselves with people who do not share our perspective or who are not actually trying to advance society for the betterment of
Right.
society,
Right.
right?
And
They're
so
doing it for their own.
Gemini, that's that duality.
Yes, we're existing. So, again, we're going to have the shadow side. We're going to have one twin and the other twin. So,
Yeah.
Elon Musk might represent one twin. There might be another twin that emerges that might be better. But again, it's going to be dualistic. So, we're going to probably have to fight our nature of trust, belief, right? And we're going to really have to change and be flexible in our perspectives
Mhm.
of what's coming up. Now, what's interesting about these three planets is that they will harmonize, meaning that Aquarius works well with Gemini, and Gemini works well with Aquarius, and both of those work well with Aries. So
Right.
all three of them, yes, all three of them are going to harmonize. A long time ago, when astrologers looked at this period of time, they viewed this as the years of the great benefic or years of peace. I don't necessarily know if that's 100% true. I think, as I mentioned to you kind of before we started recording, I don't, I think none of that's going to come without hard work, right? It's not like we're just going to have to suddenly we wake up and everything feels peaceful and better again,
Yeah, I
right?
think people want that, and it's
And it's just not.
understandable as a human being why you would want that.
Yeah.
Nothing worth having comes easily.
No. And this brings me to my next transit that I think is really important, where we're going to talk about the ever-present, ever hardworking planet Saturn.
Mm,
Okay.
mm. The
Sometimes I say,
taskmaster, is that what they call it?
yes, 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 yes. In tarot, it's the world, right? That
Okay.
card equivalent. So that feels also right. You work really hard for this thing, right? And you do reap a reward. That's what Saturn will give you at the end of your hard work.
Mhm.
Um, but it's still hard work,
Right,
right? You still have to go through the journey of the major arcana to even get there
right.
to begin with.
If you don't do the hard work, you'll be given another opportunity to do it, but it'll be harder work.
Right. And I think I love that you said that because that just feels like such a Saturn thing to me,
Yeah,
where Saturn's like, okay, well, I don't know if you put in enough sweat equity,
yeah.
right? There's a reason why that planet is very much so likened to the idea of restructure or
Mhm.
structure and foundation. I always think about Saturn in terms of like remodeling a home,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You want to do it the right way the first time so you don't have to go back and do it again,
Right.
right? So so right now Saturn is in Pisces. It has been in Pisces since I believe it was 2023. It will kind of be in and out of the sign this year, but again, we're going to have another taste of something that's going to come up in 2026. At the end of May until early September, Saturn will move into Aries. Now, traditionally speaking, Saturn does not like being in the sign of Aries. And this is because Saturn's a taskmaster, right? Really working very hard, diligent, focused.
Aries is like, hurry up.
Yes, 1000, you got it, right? Aries is like,
Yeah.
I hurry up and wait, right? Like, I don't want to
Right.
do that. And that's very much so going to be the energy. There'll be a little bit of a push and pull. But I do want to comment that Saturn in Aries is also going to harmonize with the other three planets that I just mentioned. So it will soften or maybe help direct some of the energy that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Saturn was in Aries in 1967 to 1969.
Oh,
Very
oh,
important.
yeah, that I'm telling you, I was maybe like 11 or 12 around that time. And if I have to, I mean, I'm 68 now, almost 69.
Hmm.
If I have to think of a pivotal year in my life that
Uh-huh.
formed my thought processes and my worldview, it would have been 1968.
And think about, again, the social political climate during that time,
Yeah.
right? The civil rights movements that were going on. And there was a lot, again, of like this social unrest happening in across the country. Um, so,
At the
we
same
were,
time that there was all that peace, love, and whatever. So
yes.
it's making me think if we're thinking about now, right? On the one hand, a lot of people are feeling the fierce urgency of now. That would be Aries. But on the other hand, the Neptune is saying, yeah, but sweetie, this is the long game. So can you sustain the energy of now, have it be fierce, but understand that it has to be sustained over a long
Mhm.
period, which is why this 50-51 thing is
Yes.
so good. It's not just a one and done. Will you show up, every 2 weeks?
Mhm.
Over and over and over and over and over again. That's sort of teaching people, I feel like, to build their muscles of keeping the urgency, but
Yes.
understanding the importance of it being sustained.
1000%. I love that you said this. It's a sprint, not a or it's a marathon, not a sprint,
Right.
right? Is kind of like what comes to mind here. And it's funny, it's so funny. You were like, for someone who's the lowest common denominator in astrology, you got it. You picked it
Have
up real
such good
fast.
teachers, though.
So, but it's going to very much so be this way that the evolution of the way that we experience this world can only come, right, with the balance of, or go back to duality. I mentioned duality several times, of being able to have the fire, Aries, to really get that anger and like, but channeling that anger in a very productive, very Saturnian way of long-term steadfastness. Now, Saturn will only be in Aries for 2.5, 3 years. So we'll get a taste this year, 2026, and then for a few years after. But this is why that 3 year period I talked about is seen as like the great benefic period, because there's going to be a lot of harmonization that's really going to support. And I do think it's a lot about sustainability, but I think that we have to have the gusto right out the gate to make sure that we've kind of lit the dynamite,
Right,
essentially,
right.
even if it takes a minute for it to become fireworks. And I also find that with these planets all sort of working together, especially in 2026, when we see that really happening, I think that we are going to be asked to be very present in a way that we haven't been. Previous to this, a lot of our outer planets had been in earth and water signs, right? So there's a stagnancy sometimes, there's a nourishment. Earth and water are very nourishing.
Mhm.
But there's also a stagnancy or an inability to know where to go. There's no direction sometimes because we're more focused on the rooting and the grounding. Now that a lot of these are going to be in air and fire signs, right? Things are going to start to torch a little bit, right? We're going to kind of baptize by fire, sort
Yeah.
of feels like the vibe. Um, but in a really positive way, both of those elements are much more social, much more worldly, and much more present than I believe earth and water can be, right? Earth and water can be a bit more past oriented.
Oh,
This
you've
is more
got
present future.
we've got the orange one,
Yes.
pronounces it like it's a poem or a prayer. He says, America will be woke no more.
Hmm.
And that's his prayer. That is his prayer to his underworld god. But in fact, what you're talking about is more and more people understanding that woke is not a pejorative, that in fact
Hmm.
it's a requirement because to be present, you have to be awake. And
Yeah.
being awake means being woke.
You took the words right out of my mouth, where when you were talking, the first thing I thought of is woke or not, we are
Mhm,
all awakening,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Um, Pluto. in tarot is judgment. And what's one of the meanings of judgment? It's awakening, right? And so collectively, we all are starting to wake up,
Like it or not.
especially like it or not. And this is what I was talking about. It's not going to be a culture war. That's what they want. They want it to be a culture war because it silos us and segments us,
Right.
right? But it is going to be a class war
Mhm.
because that's the thing they fear the most.
Right.
The most revolutionary times in history have been when classes have come together.
Right.
Okay. So this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of this video, where some of us may have to put aside some of our ideologies for the moment, right? And I'm not talking about the ideologies that are actively harming people or seeing people die, but maybe certain things that we have to know that we can all work together towards a common goal to then move forward and progress to then get some of those ideas back onto the plate
Right.
and rolling again.
Right. Right.
So,
So some of those big ideas are that everybody deserves a living wage, whether they can
yes,
work for it or not. Everybody deserves health care. Everybody
yes.
deserves education that is free and that is non-repressive.
Mhm.
So those are like the big things. Everybody
Yes.
deserves food that is clean and abundant and healthy. So those are the big things that we all need in order to just exist in the world.
Yes,
And so those are the
absolutely.
commonalities that we will join, link hands around, right? And as you say, everything else can come after that.
I agree. It's interesting. There's a few other specifically in 2026, we will have Jupiter in Leo, and then we will have the eclipses begin in Leo and Aquarius. So Leo is very big-hearted, right?
A
It can
beast of
be
Leo. I'm a Leo.
I know you have lots of Leo in your chart. Actually, Jupiter in Leo is going to be really good for you. But
Good. All right.
on a personal level, on a collective level, it's really going to inspire or maybe expand or grow like what we personally have passion around, our pride, maybe actual pride. LGBT rights will start to where it's being reductive right now. Maybe there's pushes against that in a bigger way
Mhm.
next year. But then also we have the eclipses in Leo and Aquarius with the South Node going through Leo. There are going to be certain Leo-like things we're also going to have to let go of, right?
Mhm.
Which the shadow side of Leo is also authoritarianism, right?
Okay, right. The lower level of the.
Yes, yeah. The selfishness that can
Mhm.
be, I'm gonna put those in quotes, Leoness, the very like all everyone out for themselves, the very orange one of the world,
Right.
right? To then the North Node, the place where we're gonna feel hungry collectively is Aquarius, which as I talked about earlier is like innovation, progress, hope, right? I don't want us to
And
go
humanitarianism.
yes, exactly. I don't want us to go into dystopia, right? I think that's where everyone's afraid that we're heading into,
Mhm.
especially with Pluto and Aquarius. One of the shadow sides could be dystopia.
Mhm.
But I think we have a lot of opportunity to change that
Mhm.
and to make it this place of true equity, right? Of truly coming together, meaning, knowing what it truly means to be indivisible,
Right.
right? There is no divide when we start to see ourselves on the same level, the same playing field as everybody else. So the first eclipse in that series will be February of 2026. And around that time, we will also have the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So there's a lot sort of going on, especially next year in 2026, where we are going to have big pushes, where we have opportunities, I should say, for big pushes forward into progress. And we're going to get tastes this year, which is why we're organizing, which is
Mhm.
why we're doing the grassroots, which is why people are sounding the alarms and sounding the bells. And, maybe out of this period, we're going to look at our government a lot differently.
Mhm.
Maybe we're going to want different regulations and rules put into place
Mhm.
about our government and how we're structured in our democracy, and possibly even starting to expand what parties exist
Right.
in our democracy. We've effectively existed as a two-party democracy or two-party political system for how long, right?
Well, the founding fathers, I'm going to say, I mean, racist slaveholders that they were,
Yeah,
were
beyond.
were also geniuses. They were geniuses and they were visionaries. That said, though, we are a long way from 1776. And
Hmm.
some of what we're seeing now is the holes that they could never in a million years have
Have
anticipated.
imagined.
And
Mhm.
so it reminds me of your, in the beginning of the conversation where you talked about, if you're going to build a house, you don't want to, say, oh, forget the foundation. Let's just make it look pretty.
Yeah. No.
And then wonder why you fall in a sinkhole in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
right? So we're getting a chance to go back to that foundation,
Yeah.
and really look at why things have been structured the way they are, whom that benefited, and then
Mhm.
decide how can we make this what the founding fathers themselves urged us to do, a
Mhm.
more perfect union.
Absolutely. And I think, you said it so beautifully. I think a lot of this is, yes, I don't think the founding fathers were great people, both personally and in their slaveholding, in the way that they treated each other, the way they treated
Mhm.
women, right? Exactly. People, anyone who was different from them that wasn't a white, rich man, which then we can also argue has always been the foundation of this country, is only
Yes,
supporting white,
yes,
rich,
yes.
straight
And
men.
that's going to have to be looked at again. Like, is that really
Exactly that, where we can take the ideals that they had, but shape them to the reality of today,
right?
right? The reality of the situation and the experiences that we're having in this world, in this country. And I feel very much so that you're right, we get this opportunity to go back and do that now. And why wouldn't we? Regardless of it being a perfect union or not, it just needs to be a better union than
Right,
what it is now.
right, right. A more perfect. They never
Yes.
said perfect,
Yep.
but they say more perfect. They meant better. I mean, and this is like it makes me think of the Supreme Court, right? You've got
Hmm.
originalists, and then you've got the textualists. And
Hmm.
I think common sense will show more and more people how in the world can you rationalize being an originalist? Like, what are you
Hmm.
talking about? We don't
Hmm.
live in that world anymore. I mean, the law like language has to be living in order to be relevant.
I agree. I always say that the past is in the past for a reason. We can use it as a place to teach us,
Mhm.
but we can't be stuck there. We have to adapt it in order to actually move forward in any, even personally, we have to adapt whatever we learned in the past into the present to
Right.
make the future a better place, even just for yourself. So why wouldn't we want that in any way, shape, or form? I do think, just as a side note, some of the other things that we're going to see emerge, I think the unions are going to grow stronger. So the working unions are going to grow stronger. I think they're going to be a part of this class sort of bringing together class solidarity.
So when we look
Uh,
at places like, for example, that are going out of business,
yeah.
Target and Walmart, I mean, if they want to be back in business, they're going to have to massively restructure, and part of that is going to have to be support and
Unionization.
encouragement of unions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing that collectively in this country, we are supporting companies that support unions,
Hmm.
right? Say what you will about, I don't have a Costco membership, but I do know that there's been movements towards Costco employees unionizing. It's worked out for them. And also Costco did not back down on DEI.
Right. We
Again,
went and we went and got Costco cards just because.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, again, we don't, and there's no such thing as a good or a good corporation,
Right.
right? So I'll be clear there. But I think one of the things that we're also going to find through this larger shift astrologically is the commentary that we've always had, vote with your dollar. I think it's going to mean something
Hmm.
more so, especially because the dollar is harder to come by for a lot of us
Right.
right now,
Right.
right?
Right.
So as there can or may or hopefully won't be a larger class divide, then we can take, how do we then take from the rich and give back to everyone else in
Hmm.
some way?
Hmm.
That Robin, how do we become Robin Hood
Hmm. Hmm.
collectively?
Very exciting.
Yeah, it makes me feel hopeful, even through historically knowing that some of this time has been there's been turmoil, but I do think through the churning, good things emerge, right? They say everything's born out of chaos.
Mhm.
right? Like the Big Bang, right? Everything it came from an explosion. And I think, we may not have super destructive explosions, and I hope we don't,
Mhm.
right? But I do think this bubbling, this sort of like volcanic energy we're all feeling within us, there's reasons for it, and I think it's going to be the force that pulls us closer together. And sort of like an atom, right? When atoms meet, we're gonna start oscillating a little bit harder, and then yeah, it's gonna burst into something much better, much bigger, hopefully more beautiful.
No, I think that's a great message because, I mean, what put me in mind, what it put me in mind of is, I don't know, a chick who is very comfortable in that dark, warm egg, but
Hmm.
then they start to grow and now it's uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good to the point where they have to break it open.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
So I think a lot of people are still in that egg stage. They want to just go back to sleep, stay where it's warm and comfortable, but they're feeling discomfort. And I think
Hmm.
that the message is that's that's a good thing. It's like
Yes.
if you I don't know, if you have an injury, pain can be involved in the healing.
Yes.
Right. And we're
Hmm.
having this opportunity. I always say, that, for example, race is the great national wound. We talk about shadow work. Shadow work,
Hmm.
people don't want to do shadow work. Well, people
Right.
don't want to do work around race. But it's like
Yes.
taking a gaping wound and saying, oh God, that's so gross. I don't want to look at that. And slapping a Band-Aid on it and thinking, this is great because I can't see it. But meanwhile, what's going on under there? And when
Yeah.
your arm falls off from gangrene, maybe you realize, oh, I should have addressed this differently. And maybe addressing it would have been
Hmm.
painful. Like I would have had to debride it and I would have had to pour peroxide on it or whatever it is. And that really, really hurts. But that's where the healing comes from. And I feel like that's sort of writ large what we're talking about here.
I could not agree more. It making me think a lot about Neptune in Aries and Saturn in Aries, that conflict resolution is only formed through hitting something head on,
Yeah.
right? Aries has no problem charging face forward into conflict. And I think we're gonna have to reimagine our relationship with anger, right? We're taught
Yes.
as a society that anger is a bad thing, and they use that as a way to suppress people and
Yes.
oppress people, right? If you think about the trope that is often put on Black women, it's that they're angry,
Yes.
mean, nasty. And that is so terrible because it is used to oppress them,
That's
right?
right. When meanwhile, it's about being direct.
Yeah.
I seem like this sweet little old lady, this little black lady that, and so, but I talk about hard things sometimes,
Mhm.
and there will be
And you should.
viewers, and I should, and there will be viewers who will say things like, uh, I find that offensive, or why didn't you tell people this was a black channel? I thought it was for everyone. Or will tone police what I'm saying, tone police me. And
Ah.
it's just, but what it comes from is this cultural, it's what you said, it's this cultural approval, especially white women get for being non-confrontational, having
Mhm.
a modulated tone, don't talk
Mhm.
about certain things, use as your excuse that you don't want to
Mhm.
say the wrong thing. And then if you need a further excuse, say, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I don't want to offend anybody. Is
Mhm.
that really what your thing is? Or is it because you don't want the response that you'll get?
Right.
It's your discomfort. And I think a lot of my viewers are starting to see that and understand the merit of speaking up and using your voice. And you're right, the culture at large does not approve of that.
No, we don't deal well with anger. We want everything to fit into a box. We want everything to
Yes.
feel comfortable. It makes me think, I think I mentioned one of the last times, not the last time, but one of the last times that Saturn was in Aries was 1967 to 1969, Stonewall riots,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
And I can only speak from what is my perspective of being an LGBTQ um, person. There's also this anger and what has happened to pride over time. I mean, you're also an LGBTQ person as well. What has happened to pride over time, right? It has become palatable.
right,
We've taken the rage and the anger out of pride to deliver it to society in a way that feels comfortable and good.
right,
But now that those rights are being taken away from all of us in the
right.
wonderful alphabet community, then, what ends up happening is that you're going to see a lot of our rage
That's
and
right,
our anger, and there will be more hate and conflict directed at us as we fight back for.
right.
Same thing, right? Black women have often been the lowest rung, right? Lowest tier, especially Black queer
Yep,
people, right? And so as they've been sounding the alarms forever.
right,
And, Pride only started because of Black trans women.
right.
So now all of us are able to come together and collectively put that anger somewhere. And our anger has to be visible, it has to be witnessed, it has to be seen. And I am sorry if it makes other people uncomfortable, but I'm also not sorry because you
Sorry,
have
not
to,
sorry.
yeah, you have to examine and understand why is there rage,
Right,
right? And then from that collective spark, right? Saturn and Aries, Neptune and Aries, how do then we sustain long-term growth and progress,
right.
right? From those moments of anger. Maybe that's part of the explosion is that we need to remind people the marginalized are angry for a reason,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Same thing with disabled folks,
Right,
right?
right,
They are angry for a reason.
right,
They are being demonized,
right,
right? Especially right now with RFK. And it's awful. And, they have the right to speak up, to fight back, just like we all do.
right.
So it's going to take us all.
Righteous anger. The anger is righteous.
Oh,
And right. And I think people as a whole are like righteous anger. How is that possible?
hmm
So I mean I think it's a very exciting time.
hmm We are living history, right? We
Yes.
always are, but so much more right now than we realize.
Yes.
I keep thinking back at like some point, hopefully in my lifetime, what I hope really interesting things are written about in history books and how we've persevered,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think, I think maybe an advice that I have to your viewers is learning how to accept your anger and your grief, channeling it into something more heart-centered toward love and compassion, because love and hate, like this,
Right.
right? They
Right.
exist so close together.
Right.
Um, if you feel helpless, reach out, connect with people. Community, Aquarius rules community, right? It's going to be far more important than we can ever imagine. And start seeing where you are more alike than where you are more different. And if you do not understand someone's point of view or why they're angry, start examining in yourself why that is.
Right. Right.
So that's my
Yeah, I mean,
advice.
that's right, because it's why is the assumption I don't understand it, therefore it's not valid. Maybe turn that mirror around. I don't understand it. Why don't I understand it?
Yeah.
What is it making me feel? And and
Yeah.
why am I sort of shoving that discomfort on the other person and making it their problem? We
hmm
have such an opportunity. I mean, I think that's why this community of mine has grown so much. I think people are hungry for this kind of information, for this
hmm
kind of community, and for this kind of hope. Because in the midst of everything that we see that's so ugly, um, I think it's really important to show people why this is the way that it is and how we can um, what sort of refine it in a crucible, refine it
hmm
into the gold that it can become.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, we're looking for resources, and I think the resource that is going to prove the most abundant is connection,
Yeah.
relationship, and community. I always say, you know, community is the backbone of abundance. In astrology, in a more traditional perspective, the 11th house, which is a house of community,
Mhm.
is also sometimes seen as the house of abundance.
Mhm.
And it's a place that Jupiter, the planet of abundance, loves to be. And it's always that reminder to me that
Mhm.
community is the reason why we have the most, how we can exist together. We think back in history, the only way we've ever been able to thrive in societies is when we've worked
Together.
together. Yes. And I think that that is the overall sort of situation that we are heading into or that we've been in and that we need to recognize. I think even on the other side, there's been a lot of articles written on the isolation of white men,
Mm.
right? in society. And so they're finding each other and they're existing in a vacuum and building this kind of incel community,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Hyper toxic masculinity. There was a really interesting article just written by a woman who infiltrated that community and went on dates with these men for
Oh, I saw
cosmopolitan.
that. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. But she talked about like she's like they have liberal friends, they have liberal speak, right? But they feel isolated because they're not fully represented. Well, sorry about that, right? You've had it good, too good for too long. But I think, even they are looking for community because they feel so isolated, just like we're looking for community because we feel so isolated. So there is still, and I'm not saying we are the same as them, but there are still commonalities,
Right,
right, in our core desire of connection.
right,
More than anything else, we just want to feel connected.
right. And what I always tell my viewers, and I have to tell myself also, as people start to wake up
Hmm.
and see the degrees and the many ways that they're being disenfranchised, uh, we have to be welcoming. If they say, I voted for but I didn't know that was gonna me, we can't, you can't say, I mean, you want to say,
Sorry about it.
did I tell you, did we not? But but it's just, I mean, that's alienating, right?
Yeah.
So I think sort of practicing being open-hearted and welcoming is
Yeah. I think maybe this makes me think a little bit about Uranus and Gemini. Inclusion requires education,
yeah,
right? And although those of us who have lived experience shouldn't always be the ones who are educating people on why or why not, right? Unfortunately, history has shown us time and time again,
that's what
it
happened.
falls on our backs. So,
You know what? But and I think it's important on those people who need to be educated that they're listening, which they will start to do more and more, not be what I call performative.
mhm.
This is what Black women have said. That's
Yeah,
why the whole thing about, well, I'm going to mind my Black business and drink my water, and you won't
yeah,
do. But because we, I always talk about around George Floyd's death. I had a
hmm
lot of people come out of the woodwork, white people, um, people from my past, people from all different walks of life, wanting to get in touch. And basically, bottom line, what they wanted was to give this message that I'm one of the good ones,
I'm a
and
good person.
I'm a good person. And I thought, oh, this is nice. And then I said to myself, Erica, it's not going to last. Not only is it not going to last, they're going to resent the fact that this situation with George Floyd made them feel like they had to reach out in this way.
Yeah.
And what we see is this resentment. This is what we see. This is how this person got elected two
hmm
times.
hmm
Okay, so I think that for the people who are coming in out of the cold, practice listening that is authentic and not performative. Don't
hmm
ask the same questions over and over and over. If there's stupid questions, maybe Google it before you ask a Black woman or a gay man, can you explain to me blah blah,
hmm
like do your homework.
hmm
And you will be met more than halfway if you do that. But if it's performative, nobody's got time for that.
This makes me think about if I follow and read and watch a poet, a social activist, and a performer named Alok. They're non-binary. Yeah, Alok. I highly recommend them. They've been on several podcasts. They've talked a lot about their experience as being culturally Southeast Asian. I think they're of Indian descent. They're queer, trans, non-binary. And one of the things that they talked about was this urgent need for compassion or an urgent need for humanity, right? And that when they are shown disgust by others for their existence, they meet them with love. And I think that's really hard to do. So I'm not saying everybody needs to do that because I think there's a lot of anger there. But one of the things that I loved is that they talked about you don't need to understand me to have compassion for me, right? People always want to understand why, right? I talked about inclusion requiring education. It doesn't mean that you have to be uneducated to include others, but compassion does not require facts and figures. It requires empathy. And that conversation was so profound to me personally because I've always spent so much time trying to explain myself, why I feel like I need this or that. I'm sure you felt the same way in some capacity, but it gave me an opportunity to take a step back and go, you don't have to understand who I am to know that I have the right to exist in this
Indeed,
world.
that's right.
So, all of to kind of bring it back to the point that you were making as people are coming in from out of the cold, if you are wanting to be included in the conversation, educate yourself, yes, but also know that you will not always understand why. You need to have compassion for people.
And that's okay. Just it's a given. Compassion.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's sort of a base requirement.
Hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
1000%. So I hopefully everyone here has been able to get a little bit of hope or glean some information kind of
This
coming
has
into
been
this new
great,
period.
Anthony. I'm so glad that I had you on. I'm sure we'll have you back. By the way, listen, if you want a personal reading that will blow your mind, Anthony is the go-to guy. He's just a brilliant, brilliant astrologer, and I'll have all of his information in my show notes, so you can find him there. But Anthony, thank you so much.
Erica, thank you. This has been so wonderful. I adore you. My
Well,
goodness.
you know what? It's mutual. It's mutual. We will do this again. I know my audience will feel buoyed and edified by this conversation. And I think that's important. You know, during the week, I'll predict a lot of stuff, and it's not always, roses for me or for them. But on Sundays, I do like to have us look at things from maybe a different perspective. And I knew you
Mhm.
would be a perfect guest, and you have been. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This is so funny. It makes me think I'm Italian, both sides of my family, and makes me think of Sunday dinners, right? Where
Yes,
like you have a really hard week and then you all
exactly.
come together and
Exactly.
you sit in the kitchen and you enjoy food together. So this kind of feels like a Sunday dinner.
Good. Well, that is my hope. So, listen, you all. That was our Sunday conversation for this week, and thank you all for listening. Please do check out all of Anthony's offerings. He's terrific, and I will see everybody next week. Have a great Sunday. Take care.